Hello, everybody. Morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome to our knowledge drop session on locally led climate solutions, perspectives from VCA. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Karen Morris, and I'm from South North. I work on the Voices for Just Climate Action program as a knowledge management and communications manager from South North. And I'll be hosting the session today and welcoming you and doing introductions. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through some housekeeping with you. So we're going to have a panel of speakers today. So please ensure that you are on mute while the panelists are speaking so that we can avoid disruptions. And then also make sure that your Zoom tag has your name and organization so that if we see multiple people in the group, please change your name to your actual name and organization so we know who's who that has joined us today. So we're going to go through to our engagement. So how we're going to engage today is, if you have a question, please feel free to post it into the question and answer box, or Q&A box. That will be on your Zoom screen in your menu bar, normally at the bottom. You'll see a Q&A with two bubbles there. So you can post your question in your own language. We might not get to everybody's questions, but we will try our best to do so. Or we'll try to send answers to the questions post the session. If you'd like to make a comment, you can please do so in the chat box. We're going to do things a little bit differently today. We're going to have, as I mentioned, we're going to have a panel discussion and something that's called a fishbowl discussion, which will give everybody an opportunity to be part of the discussion. So if you'd like to be part of it, please raise your digital hand, and that will give us an indication that to add you and to spotlight you as part of the group. Then we have, in terms of interpretation, so we have interpretation in English, Spanish, Brazilian, Portuguese, and Bahasa. All you need to do is to switch to the channel that you are comfortable with, and please feel free to speak in any of those languages. For the English speakers, join the English channel so that you can follow the session. And then if you need any technical support, or if you have any questions with regards to Zoom, you can send a chat message to meeting support, or if you have any other technical questions, then please send them to meeting support at southnorth.org, or you could even put them into the Q&A box as well. So what I'd like to do now, I'd like to hand you over to Josh Ogada. Josh also works at South North, and he works on the VCA program as the program lead. He'll be moderating the session today. So Josh, over to you.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people attending our session today, and we look forward to nice, vibrant discussions and some really good interventions. We've got a list of panelists that are going to be speaking, and we're looking forward to having the discussion with them. And as Karen mentioned as well, we're excited to have a fishbowl session where we will have the opportunity for you all to participate in that. Just a couple of reminders. I mean, Karen did already mention this, but for the fishbowl discussion, we will be asking those of you who are attending the meeting to please join us and be part of the conversation, to share with you in your reflections. And what we will do for that session is asking you to raise your hand at that point. So I'll be moderating that session. I will let you know when you can raise your hands and be selected so that you can give your intervention. However, in the course of the meeting, if you have any questions, then we would ask you to use the Q&A box. You'll find it at the bottom of your screen. If it is not already visible on the strip at the bottom of your screen, you can click the three little dots that say more, and it should open up and show you the Q&A box. Likewise with the interpretation, in case some of you are struggling to find it, you will see a globe at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation, where you can select your language. We are very, very happy to have you all here and look forward to having a really good interactive session. For us, language justice is very important. So this is the reason why we have interpretation, and we ask those of you who speak other languages other than English to please feel free to express your questions, to have your views heard in whichever language you are comfortable, and it will be translated. It will be interpreted for everybody. But definitely looking forward to a really good session. So after a fishbowl session, we will have a short session to come back, do a loop around, and have an overview and reflect together on the discussions for the day. It will be a chance to go back to our panelists to hear from them what they are hearing from the floor. So your contributions will be very important, and then we'll have a reflection on what we've learned from this session, and then we will be ending it at that point. At this stage, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague Maimuna Kabatesi, who's the VCA Global Program Manager sitting in Hivos, who's going to be doing the scene setting for us on locally led climate solutions. So welcome, and over to you, Maimuna.
Thank you, Josh, so much for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. I know we're joining from all over the world today. So I'm really, really excited to be here today to be the scene setter. As Josh has mentioned, my name is Maimuna Kabatesi. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I work for Hivos. And I'm part of the VCA Alliance, so working in conjunction with so many of you all over the world, here today. I'll just proceed as it's coming up. It's, to be honest, quite a brief presentation. And I'll be honest, as I start, it was really a challenge to try to think about how I could start to distill everything I really wanted to say about locally led solutions in the short time that we have, because of course I'm excited to hear from the panel, and also for the fishbowl session. So I'll just try to give a very, very, very brief overview, but I know that the session will be able to go so much deeper. We'll be able to learn a lot from the panelists that are joining us. I'm sure I don't need to repeat for the audience, everybody who's joining us today, the various severe impacts of climate change that we've seen around the world, how they affect us, how they affect the communities that we work with, the communities that we are a part of. All of us are really gravely aware of how urgent the situation is and the need for urgent action now. In particular, of course, for marginalized communities, including, but not limited to, Indigenous people, women, children, the disabled, and others. I wanted to kind of take us back to VCA. Why is it that we work on local climate solutions? And when we started the conceptualization for the Voices for Just Climate Action program, the foundation was really set on the principle of self-determination for Indigenous peoples, for local communities, for all marginalized communities affected by climate change. For far too long in the global community, the global climate response to climate change has been really paternalistic in nature. There's been this persistent idea that the countries that have caused climate change and continue to cause climate change also hold the solution to climate change. So there's kind of a dismissal of local communities, of local traditional indigenous knowledge. And of course, in addition to this, the funds to respond to climate change also flow from these countries, which has created a power differential that puts affected local communities at the bottom of the decision-making pyramids. Research on climate finance flows shows that less than a tenth of climate finance flows actually reaches local communities. So for every $10, less than one of that is actually going to local communities. And this is a status quo that unfortunately seems to be widely acceptable. But of course, this absolutely should not be the case. One of our goals in VCA is to change this reality. And of course, that's why our central goal, which is up on the screen now, is that by 2025, we see that local civil society groups have claimed a central role as empowered innovators, facilitators, and advocates of climate solutions. And how VCA is aiming to do this is that we are working in a number of ways to influence climate finance and investments in support of locally shaped solutions for climate adaptation and mitigation. And I think many VCA alliance and partner organizations, including our funder, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, are also signatories to the locally led adaptation principles. So for VCA, the local approach is critical to how we approach climate justice. And I just wanted to kind of give some of the countries we are working in, some of the challenges that we see, some of the different ecosystems that we have. We know that locally led solutions are important. So in VCA, we're working in several countries. Of course, we know in 3 continents, we are in Brazil, we are in Bolivia, Paraguay, we're in Kenya, Tunisia, and Zambia, we're in Indonesia, we're working at global level and at regional levels as well. And we're working with hundreds of communities around the world and with several, again, I think over 170 civil society organizations. So in these various contexts, we see so many challenges, from desertification in Tunisia to flooding in coastal Kenya and Indonesia, to lack of access to water resources in Bolivia, Paraguay, and Zambia, and not to mention the decimation of the Amazon in Brazil. There are so many challenges that we are addressing together as VCA. I think this is why for me and for VCA, local solutions are very important. Climate change affects each and every one of us differently, and local solutions must be enabled to drive their own solutions and determine their own future. I see VCA as an enabler for this very self-determination, for this very local approach that will enable everybody to be responsive to climate change. There is so much happening already in VCA with regards to local solutions and supporting them. 2.5 years into the program, we see VCA supporting communities to access financing for locally led solutions. There's capacity development ongoing so that communities are able to develop their own local solutions. And there's also direct financing to communities. We as VCA are also advocating for increased climate finance and for improved climate finance that will address the various needs of local communities. And in addition, VCA is working very closely with municipalities, with county governments, and other arms of local government to establish a supportive policy and regulatory environment that will maximize climate finance flows for local communities. There can be no local solutions without the involvement of local communities. And I think for me, this is the crux of VCA and how we work. It's not just about people coming from other countries or from other contexts to implement projects. It's about the community at the heart of these local solutions. And today we are here to hear more from VCA Alliance partner organizations, how they're working on addressing local solutions in their own communities. We are going to be hearing stories from Kenya, from Brazil, from Bolivia. And I've been looking forward to this opportunity, not only to learn more about what different countries are doing on local solutions, what different individuals are doing on local solutions, but all the ways in which we can learn from each other and support communities, especially in the Global South, to link with other communities to advocate for climate solutions. So I'm very excited to hear more from the panelists. And without further ado, Josh, let me hand back to you to kick off the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maimuna. That was a very useful context setting, and I think it does pose some very powerful questions, which I know that as the VCA Alliance, we are already in the process of addressing and attempting to answer. But I think you correctly say we are operating in a space where there are broader issues in the political, geographical, economical discourse that we can attempt to work on, but are not problems that are unique to VCA. I think there are problems that are a function of the multilateral aid ecosystem and infrastructure as we have it. But really, really glad to hear, and I think I would agree with you that there is a lot of work being done at the level of VCA to address these issues. And likewise, I'm also quite excited to hear from our panelists in the discussion that we're going to have, some of their thoughts in terms of what we are already doing. Now, very pleased to have as our panelists today, Bob Aston from the Arid Lands Information Network. Welcome, Bob. I know you're already on the call. I'm not too sure if our colleague from VCA Brazil, Lila Sainz, has joined, but as soon as she joins, then we will rope into the discussion. And also very glad to have Silvana. I know, Silvana, you're here. and looking forward to hearing from you as well. Now, for the first part of this, just want to check if Killian has already joined us. If Killian is here, it would be great to hear from you as well, and welcome to the discussion. So my first question for you, the panelists, which I'd like you to have the opportunity to give us your take on each, is the very basic question: what are locally led solutions from your perspective, and why are they important in your particular context? And for this, I think I will start with Bob. Please tell us a little bit about, give us a bit of your view. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. For Kenya, I think first what's key is when you talk about locally led solution is that communities are the ones first who are the forefront of first developing these solutions and also implementing the solutions. So the moment you have communities meaningfully engaged in first the development of these solutions and also the implementation of these solutions, then at least then it conforms to the 8 principles of locally led adaptation. So first, the meaningful engagement, also in terms of both developing and also implementation of locally led climate solutions.
Okay, thanks so much, Bob. And that makes that I think sets the context very nicely. But there's a question I want to add to that. When you talk about solutions, solutions are solutions to a problem. What is the role of the community in identifying the problems for which these solutions are designed, developed, and implemented?
First, most of the times in the development world, we normally come up with solutions on behalf of communities. But you find that, for example, when you want to contextualize issues, it's normally the communities who are the ones who are actually bearing the brunt of climate change. Communities are the ones who actually know what's happening at the local level. And so most of the time, we normally come up with solutions, maybe we decide for them, this is what we want them to do, or these are the solutions that we want to address on their behalf. But when you talk about local led climate solutions, they're the ones who first understand what the problem is. They're the ones who knows that this is what they need to do in order to address most of these challenges. So I think that's why it's really key. First, even in terms of buy-in from the communities, because they need to be part of the solution. So we have the strong buy-in from them, but also at the same time, because they also understand the local context. So it's easier when they're the ones who are leading when it comes to implementation of such solutions or interventions.
Thank you very much, Bob. Over to you, Silvana. I suppose the same question to you. What are locally led solutions and why are they important in your particular context?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm really happy for being here with you at the table to have this conversation. So in our case, the biggest climate solution we could find is to stop the bleeding of deforestation. So that's just an example. We have wide deforestation in a very important state, namely Tocantins. This state is fully located in the legal Amazon in Brazil, and it encompasses 2 biomes and a number of ecosystems. So we have the Brazilian savanna or cerrado and the Amazon biome. So we have a lot of biodiversity, and we also have lots of social diversity with different kinds of peoples and different kinds of communities, including indigenous peoples, fishermen, maroon communities, family-led communities. So in this context, deforestation is one of our biggest problems. Meanwhile, deforestation in Brazil is also the biggest producer of greenhouse gases. At the same time, we also have social injustice. So we're talking about these local peoples and local communities who are trying to advocate for their lands, who are trying to protect their regions and lands. They are still fighting for it too, because many of these communities are homeless right now. They are camping in tents. because they are fighting for their land. So this is an example. Our biggest locally led climate solution right now is to empower these local communities so that they have a right to protect their lands. And they are protecting their lands as we speak. They're trying to protect their lands against fires, against land grabbers who go into their lands and try to steal them. And by the way, land grabbers are supported by local governments sometimes. The state government in the state of Tocantins has laws that make it easier for land grabbers to grab these public lands. So these so-called public lands have been traditionally occupied by land grabbers, and traditional peoples haven't been able to reclaim these lands. And our state has laws making it easier for land grabbers to keep these lands. They steal these lands, they steal from these communities, and they are supported by the state. So a locally led climate justice for the state of Tocantins encompasses empowering these local communities so that they have a right to their lands and to everything that is provided for in our Constitution. I also think it is important to share the words of a female fisher person who is in our project, the VCA. And she says that climate justice for her is having access to a very large, moist piece of land, which is a river, a very, very good river with lots of fish, leading fish to the Araguaia River, and this region is being invaded. Traditionally, it was taken care of by local fisher people, but now they have to monitor the region on their own. So Shirlene is going to talk about this. She's going to talk about the proposition of a locally led climate solution, which is to regulate this land. Thank you. Hi, good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm here to talk about something very sad. We're talking about fishermen and fisherwomen who live off of the land, who live off of fishing. And I was born and raised fishing and eating fish, and I believe that we should take care of our rivers. If we do take care of our rivers, we'll always have our rivers, and fishermen and fisherwomen rely on that. I think we need to be more human beings. We need to take care of our rivers because a lot of people live off of them. So we're fighting to protect these areas. We're trying to protect our land because our land is all about fishing. And I always wonder about my grandkids and whether or not they'll have fish for themselves, but we're going to fight for it. Thank you. And I'm relying on your support and your help. Thanks. By the way, thank you, Silvana. Thank you for being such a dear to us. Thank you for fighting with us. We need more people fighting alongside ourselves, but we're going to win because God conquers it all. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Silvana, and thank you so much, Charlene. I was particularly touched by your intervention, Silvana, and Charlene as well, and it brings a question to mind, which I think I will maybe tag on to the second question that we're going to ask. But I'll ask this of the panelists and maybe ask you, Bob, to reflect on it, and maybe others as well. We can keep this for the discussion. When we talk about locally led solutions to address climate change, we are assuming that there is a certain baseline of ability to develop these solutions, and that the problems that we're relating to are at a certain level, especially in terms of climate change. But listening to our sisters from the Amazon area, there is the issue of social injustice that exists before you are even able to develop locally led solutions to climate change. How do we address those? I mean, do locally led solutions apply when you are dealing with the baseline social injustice that needs to be addressed before people are even in a position to start having the conversation about locally led solutions? I think there's an issue around identification of problems. And I don't know, maybe I will throw the question first to you, Silvana. What is the baseline that is needed in terms of establishing a certain level of social justice, and what needs to be done in order for the discussion to even happen around climate solutions to climate change?
Thank you for your question, Josh. I fully agree with your remarks. And yes, this has a direct impact on us. You know, locally led climate solutions need to start with having better climate justice in Brazil. For traditional peoples and traditional communities, social justice has to do with making their lands official and reclaiming their lands, because these lands have been occupied. And according to our constitution, they are legally entitled to these lands. So they need the right to land. They need the right to their territories. They need the right of doing what they've always done, which is living sustainable lives, relying on their survival activities with extractivism, locally, of course, and the use of their land. These are fundamental rights. Without access to these rights, there's no climate justice. There's no progress in climate solutions. So this is our reference. Now, as we make these lands official, as we have rights to them, then we have access to other strategies. For example, in our coalition, we've seen lands that have been made official. For example, the Apinagé indigenous lands or the Acraú indigenous lands. So for these lands, then we can go further onto other challenges. We can talk about the sustainability of traditional ways of living in these lands. However, we still have to fight fires, forest fires, which are created by other parties. We see so many of these fires, and they are not under control, and they are brought about by farmers. So these indigenous communities have voluntary brigades. Indigenous communities get together and create groups that fight these fires. They surveil their land so that illegal hunters or poachers do not invade these lands. So we're talking about other types of struggles related to the preservation and protection of these lands, even when they are official lands, demarcated lands, because we always see people trespassing. So we need projects and we need activities to support these locally led initiatives by local communities, communities that are proposing locally led solutions to protect these lands. And of course, these things cost money. For the brigade, they need fuel, transportation, food. And these initiatives benefit everyone all over the world. We want these lands not to be burned. We don't want forest fires in these lands because forest fires add a lot to the problems that we have climate-wise. So protecting these lands is actually a service that is provided to humankind. Protecting these lands is something that benefits humankind. So these are concrete, easy climate solutions that are locally led. So we need public policies for that. This is another arena where we work a lot with our coalition. We try to have an impact on local policies so that the Brazilian government fulfills its duty in supporting these local communities when protecting these lands. So on the one hand, we need land laws. We have been working a lot on that. On the other hand, we have environmental policies which need to be bettered or implemented in Brazil. And we also have a whole set of policies that are related to fostering the protection of these lands, which are already official. So this is some of what we've been doing in the state of Tocantins.
Thank you very much, Leela. And I will come back to you in a little bit to maybe to both of you to talk a little bit more around capacity building, but also climate finance. I know you touched on that a little bit, but I will come back and we can talk about that. Right now, I'd like to pop over to Bob and ask you specifically how VCA's work, in your view, how VCA's work around locally led climate solutions ties in with the broader principles of locally led adaptation.
First for VCA, and this both for the Alliance members, but also the partners in Kenya, particularly when it comes to addressing structural inequalities in the country. VCA has been keen, particularly first integrating gender equality and also social inclusion in our programming. I think this across all the VCA partners. And for partners particularly working with marginalized communities or working in areas, for example, where we have indigenous communities. For example, we have partners in Kenya, for example, the WWF Kenya, ALIN, there's also NACOF and other partners who are working in Nakuru County, and they're working with Oki communities. These are traditionally marginalized communities in the country, and it's not just Ogi communities, but other partners who are across the country or working communities who normally are not involved or not engaged when it comes to developing locally led climate actions and initiatives. But also besides this, also youth. In Kenya, for example, in our 2019 census, almost 79% of the country are youth. But you find that most of the times youth are not at the forefront when it comes to coming up with climate change solutions. And so for VCA, both the Alliance members and partners, when you find most of the work that the partners are doing in Kenya, there's a lot more emphasis, particularly in terms of how we can be able to ensure that we include some of these marginalized groups or people normally not included when it comes to decision making. And for the partners, particularly those working with the county governments in Kenya, it's great because in Kenya, particularly those working in the county government, where we have ward level or we have different structures, particularly the county climate change planning committees, but also the ward climate change planning committees. One avenue is that for most counties right now, at least there's an avenue for communities to be involved in decision making right from the grassroots level, particularly through the ward climate change planning committees. So you find in most of these committees, you have representatives, youth representatives. We have, in most cases, the marginalized, the youth, women, but we also have either the marginalized or indigenous communities, which in some cases we find is either the Ogiek or communities that are normally not engaged. So for VC, I think this has been one key positive aspect, particularly when it comes to aligning some of the work, but when it comes to addressing structural inequalities and looking at some of the principles of locally led adaptation. So I think for VCA, this has been key in terms of inclusivity and also addressing structural inequalities in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I will stay with you for a minute because I have a follow-up question that is, I would imagine, quite contextual, especially in the case of Kenya, but coming at it from a more general approach. When a lot of times when you hear about locally led solutions, there is almost the instinct to assume that locally led solutions would be cheaper. But now the question I'm asking is, what is the cost? What is the real cost of locally led solutions, especially in a context where you have difficult economic conditions where involving the local communities sometimes involves disempowered, disenfranchised youth who need to be engaged materially to engage in these solutions. So you're not just facing the cost of implementing the solutions, the locally led solutions, but the onus or burden is also on you to create employment in cases where there's, economic difficulties and you've got large numbers of disenfranchised and unemployed and financially disempowered youth. So from a very real sense, with the example of Kenya, I suppose, and any other examples you might pull, what is the real cost of locally led solutions? And is that a barrier to actually implementing locally led solutions as opposed to a quick parachute in with money from elsewhere?
I think first for Kenya, when you talk about local led solutions, one key aspect, particularly when you look at the principles of local led adaptation, we are talking about devolving decision making to the lowest appropriate level. And when you talk about the fast evolving decision making, in most cases you'll find that actually the cost actually reduces as opposed to spending more. And then still, when it comes to devolving decision making, because the first thing is also you're building the capacity of communities. Because one of the principles that we are talking about, investing in local capacities, so that you can be able to leave an institutional legacy. But you can only do this when you work with communities at the grassroots level, when you build the capacity. And in Kenya, just to use one example, is when you come to the structures at the local level, when you look, for example, at the ward climate change planning committees, these are most of the members are drawn from the ward level. These are community members, youth, women, persons with disability, and also other community representatives. But you find that when you're able to build their capacity, first you're able to ensure there's local ownership, because the moment community is able to own some of these initiatives at the local level, you have the strong buy-in, and which means you're also already talking about issues around sustainability, which is key, because most of the time when you're talking about development projects, and particularly the short-term projects like 1-2 years, you find that in most cases people implement, once the project ends, you find at the end of the project. But when you're looking at the principles of local-led adaptation, you've already devolved decision-making at the lowest appropriate level, which in Kenya, in most cases, is at the ward level, where you're working with the Ward Climate Change Planning Committee. Then at the same time, you're also able to invest in local capacities. Then you'll be able to have the strong buy-in communities. Communities are able to contextualize the issues that they want to address. And so you'll find that you'll actually, in terms of the cost implication, you'll actually spend less as opposed to working with people from maybe the national level. So it's actually it's less cost. You spend less when you work with communities at the grassroots level as opposed with the national level.
Thank you very much for that, Bob. I know I threw you a bit of a curveball, but thank you very much. I think it segues very nicely to the question that I'm going to bring back to you, Silvana, and to you, Charlene. I know you touched a little bit about the need for finance. But there is also the need for capacity building. And I imagine those needs are very big. But then listening to Bob, there is also a need to ensure sustainability. So when you build capacity, when you bring in financing, at some point, if those solutions are to remain locally led, then there needs to be an element of sustainability built in. So those initiatives, as they go forward, are able to continue running, but that they also remain squarely in the hands of locals. What, in your view, from your particular context, is the current situation? What more needs to be done? And yeah.
Thank you, Josh, for your question. What Bob has just said really resonates with our reality. And before answering this last question, I would love to talk about local costs. We had a deep experience with it in my institute that I'm representing. We have over 30 years of experience with financing local projects that bring solutions for local issues. Those are projects that rely on this community base. They are conceived, they are designed, implemented, and managed by those local communities themselves. We currently work with projects that cost between $30,000 and $100,000 per project, community-based ones that are currently, well, following this framework of 2-year implementation. We have around 150 projects in our case, so $1 million that are injected in those solutions in several states of Brazil. What we perceive, what we notice is that with this amount that is not that high, if you think of it, if you compare it to really large social and environmental projects, well, it still does sponsor this ensemble of solutions that are locally led. And we've been supporting industries that are now processing forest fruits and products and creating sustainable added value merchandise. And we are also supporting the creation of commercialization structures through local fairs and etc. So I'm talking about relatively cheap projects that do bring concrete and efficient solutions for community issues and problems. So sometimes it looks very simple. Let me give you an example. There was this association with 20 young honey producers working with native and European bees that were introduced to Brazil, and they were depending on middlemen because this is a region in the Amazon that produces a lot of honey, but the buyers would always come from abroad with those containers to get the honey, and they would just give those containers to the honey producers, and they could just choose the price they were willing to pay. And since they were the ones who had this structure to have the containers and to store it, the producers were dependent on them. But we gave to the producers this sponsorship, this financing of $30,000, and they could equip themselves, and their revenue went from around 2,000 reals, which is $500 per year, to 5,000 reals, up to 10,000 reals sometimes per year. So we took them away from this dependent relationship, and now they have better conditions to bargain and to set the prices that are just, that are fair to them. So as Bob said, when we build capacities, when we assess the real problems that those communities are going through, what they're facing, and when we give them very low cost financing, we can sometimes locally solve a local problem that normally is a sustainable solution as well. On the other hand, when we talk about it in a systemic way, of course, locally led are cheaper, but we need national public policies to strengthen commercialization, protection of those territories, and then we're talking about projects that need more investment, higher amounts, because then the state is managing. We need their approval, we need their presence and participation. We cannot take away from the hands of states and governments and national governments their responsibility. They are accountable for those global solutions. so that local initiatives can be scaled up because the state needs to provide that support. The Brazilian state, for instance, is supporting agribusiness. They have structure for storage, for stocking. They have aids, financial aids for buying everything they need for their crops. So they are structuring agribusiness. Why shouldn't the Brazilian government be supporting the scaling up for sustainable and locally led environmental solutions? That's my question in the end of the day. The response would be this national unity of conservation for all areas, for fishing, to use the example that we just gave you. This is a concrete solution, but it cannot be local only. It cannot be under the responsibility of this local association only. The state should have the legal competence of given the accountability and the support to that association. We need both kinds of approach. What's the duty and the right of a local community, finding locally led solutions, but using this national structure that is under the competence of national governments and states. And there should be a dialogue between both, because that's how we can reach really truly sustainable solution. And I'm not sure if I talked too much. Can you refresh my memory about your last question? I am sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thanks so much for that intervention, Silvana. I think my second question was more to do with what is needed from a financing perspective, but I think you've already addressed that to a large degree. Now, I wanted you to reflect on the issue of capacity building, which you did quite clearly, as well as the issue of financing. You have raised a very good point around national policies, which leads me to the question, and I'll start with you before I go to Bob on this. When we talk about locally led solutions, we almost get this vision of us working, being community facing, focusing on local communities and solutions coming from them, but sometimes we forget that there is the other view. There is the structural framework that involves the government policies, all of those mechanisms that are in place. In order for locally led solutions to be in place, to be possible, to be successful, what structural hard work needs to be done in terms of putting pressure on governments to formulate policies that are in favor of locally led solutions? Because we all know that quite often, especially in the case of big governments where you don't have government as much devolved to the local level, there are certain development policies that are in place, which in a lot of cases might actually go against being able to put locally led solutions in place. So what kind of lobbying, what kind of advocacy, what kind of discussions need to be happening with the already existing government structures in any setting to create an enabling environment for putting in place locally led solutions? So I'll start with you, Silvana, and then I'll come to Bob on that.
Yes, Josh, to answer this question, I will share with you the strategy of the Coalition Voices of Tocantins for Climate Action. I would like to congratulate the VAC program. You are carrying out an excellent work. You're giving support to this work in coalition. Coalition work is a great response for us to put pressure into governments to have our rights respected. The coalition in Tocantins State comprises 10 really different organizations that are community-based, with indigenous members, with fishermen, with rural workers, which is it is the biggest social movement and in Latin America, with a broader action, so to speak, nationally. And they are acting and supporting other organizations that are much more specific to Tocantins areas. We also have NGOs and academia members. In our first meeting for the composition of the group, we saw that the VAC program really believed in this very complex initiative, and we were able to create this very enriching group. During the first discussion, then we noticed that we had a lot of differences, concrete differences, really different perspectives. We would see like different legislation bills differently. Some people would be in favor of it and others would be against it. So we worked on a very simple question. What unites us? We do have a lot of differences, but what unites all of us? What's the problem that is affecting all of us? Deforestation, pollution, all the problems that we are facing socially and environmentally. So we were able to unite ourselves and define this political agenda for advocacy. We chose some policies that were a consensus to us. We all saw them as negative for climate justice in our state. And we started as a coalition to carry out advocacy initiatives. So politically, we started discussing with the Public Prosecutor's Office of the state of Tocantins in order to show the office the problems of this legislation bill that created a better environment for environmental crimes. It favored the use of certain pesticides by airplane and many other criteria. It was a bill that was favoring big civil construction projects. It was a really negative bill for climate conservation in the state. So we did a lot of advocacy, and civil society was then able to bring arguments for the judges to come to a conclusion that was that the bill was not in compliance with Brazilian Constitution. And based on that work of coalition, we were able to act on this very concrete issue, and the bill was judged as not constitutional. And it was a really important victory. Alongside the Public Prosecutor's Office, we were able to fight to prove the obvious, and it was a really important victory. 27 clauses or articles of this legislation bill were judged as not constitutional. So it is a very positive example of the power of our coalition. The advocacy of our work put pressure into the Tocantins state, and we were able to show them something that they were turning a blind eye to. We were able to work alongside other networks in the state, the agroecology movement, the human rights movement as well. We were able to create this roundtable to open a dialogue with public power and with the Public Prosecutor's Office in order to implement this policy for a better feeding service at schools for traditional communities, which was something that also brought support to their production of food in those communities. Always in compliance with health norms, which makes it very strict for you to choose what will be the products that are offered within schools. But there are norms that were passed in the bill by the Public Prosecutor's Office that makes it more flexible when you're talking about traditional communities, because they are usually self-fed. They produce the food that they need. So when we're talking about children of fishermen, of course, their diet will be much more based on fish than in other regions of Brazil. So through this roundtable that involved civil society and other members of, for instance, the Education Secretary Office, the Public Prosecutor's Office, and etc., we were able to better offer food options that were adapted to their normal diet within, of course, traditional communities. And we made it a norm that the state had to buy and had financial aid for the purchase of those specific ingredients or specific food. Our challenge now is to make this be implemented and actually respected for the future, so that the food produced by those traditional communities are then purchased by the state and offered within schools in those areas. I just gave you an example of a very concrete right, and in order to get there, we need a coalition work. We cannot act alone. It really requires strategic, qualified, and articulated action of an organized civil society. And if we have many and several different segments of society represented, it becomes more powerful. It is not easy to deal with all those different perspectives, but it is a lot more powerful. We had members of the academia, NGOs, the rural workers movement, and smaller associations as well. And together we got there through this support and through the strategy of the VAC program that I really, really praise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvana, and to Charlene as well. I'm keeping an eye on time, and I know that there are a couple of other questions that I'd like us to address, but I would like us to do that in our next session, which should be starting now, which is the fishbowl. Just one thing before we do that, I just wanted to check if any of our other panelists have joined. Okay, if not, then that is fine. I did notice that there are quite a number of comments and questions that have popped up into the meeting chat. Now, I've already got a few names there. There's Ruby from Zambia, there's William from Indonesia, there's Anna from Brazil, and there's Protas from Kenya. Since you had your comments in the chat, I'm expecting in this fishbowl that some of you will have your hands up to ask those questions, make comments, engage with us. So at this point, I think we're going to move to a fishbowl. And what we would like to do is we'd like to, if possible, get reflections from as many of us, having listened to these really, really good presentations and not presentations, I suppose interventions from Silvana, from Charlene, from Bob as well. We'd like to hear more voices around the table. So we would like to hear your reflections, your questions to the panelists, if you have them. I know that there was a question from Dinda who was asking, how does one define what qualifies as a locally led solution? So that's something that maybe our panelists can be thinking about at the moment, because we've been talking about locally led solutions, but I suppose how we view a locally led solution becomes very important. I think it can be analyzed at various different levels, but let us think through that. I am also aware that not everybody might be comfortable in putting their hands up and speaking, but I would very much encourage it. We have quite a large number of people, which we are very glad for. And I would very much like to see a first set of hands of people who would like to speak out, tell us a little bit about their context, give some reflections on what they've heard, possibly ask a question to the other participants or to our panelists. And I'm keeping an eye on that. And as any moderator worth their salt, you always have to have something in your back pocket. So if I don't see hands too quickly, there are a couple of people who are already in my target sites to be called upon to speak. I can see Adriano's got his hand half up. If you didn't mean to put your hand up, it's too bad for you. But Maimuna as well, I'd also like to hear some of your reflections. So I'll keep an eye out for you to put your digital hand up. So you can press the hands up button. But Adriano, I believe your hand is up. Is it up? Yes, it's up. There you go, Adriano. Please go ahead. Just unmute yourself and speak.
I was speaking Portuguese, if that's okay, and use the translation. I would love to hear from Shirlene. How has it been, the action that you've been carried out to raise awareness, to call the attention to the importance for the creation of this conservation unit in your territory? How has it been? What do you think of it? What's being done, and what do you think of it? How it's been your experience in order to create this conservation unit?
Let me answer your question. It hasn't been easy for me. Our fisher people have been supporting us, and we're trying to do everything. You know, I was raised here. I have kids. And fish is everything for us. We eat fish every day, and if we have fish, we're happy. And I'm saying this because so many fisher people rely on this to retire, to earn some money. My dad is retired right now, so he doesn't fish anymore, but I'm his daughter and I do. However, as Silvana was saying, we worry about deforestation. Farmers who buy land by the riverbed try to deforest everything. And we're trying to figure this out. We need to go for it. We need to fight the fight because our rivers cannot die. If we run out of fish, we're going to have problems, even with alligators. We're going to have problems. If we live off of rivers and fish, what are we going to live off of in the future? People are getting older, they need to retire, and we need a solution, but I'm ready to fight this.
Thank you very much, Adriana, and thank you so much, Charlene, for that response. Looking out for other hands. While I'm looking for hands, Maimuna, if you're still there, I'm going to come to you. Since you set the scene for us. I mean, we've had, discussions, and one of the key reflections coming from Silvana is the importance of supporting coalition work and supporting movements. From your perspective, or from where you sit within the VCA Alliance, at this stage in the program, what would you say, what more needs to be done in terms of supporting coalitions? Because I think supporting coalitions, clearly from this discussion, is not, it goes beyond increasing the civic space. It has a direct link to supporting locally led solutions. What reflections do you have around coalition building, not coalition building, supporting coalitions and supporting movements as one of the key principles, I would say, of the VCA Alliance?
Yeah, thank you for that, Josh. And I really enjoyed the reflections of some of the individuals and the spaces they're in which they're engaging with the VCA. I think for me, when we talk about supporting coalitions for civil society, it's for us to see how we can become more dynamic and more flexible in how we work with coalitions. I think sometimes with the civil society, there's a tendency to assume that everybody will work in the same way as an NGO or an organization works. And I think that there's a lot of very important movements, grassroots movements, indigenous activists that are working in ways that are different to how civil society works. And I think for us to be in arms with our brothers and sisters around the world, we need to figure out even better ways of connecting directly. I think direct support is one of the key major ways that we can make sure that we're supporting movements. The other thing that I think we really have a lot of potential for in VCA, and I think we can also see how to improve on this, is to link movements in the different countries. You know, a lot of the issues that have been brought up by, I think it is Shilen, talking about the struggles in the community, especially the reliance on fish of the community, I resonate with a lot because we hear it a lot from communities, even in my country. So there's a lot of similar struggles around the world and a lot of similar power dynamics, a lot of challenges, similar challenges with the government. How do we link these movements together so that they can work together, so that they can, you know, have louder voices, amplified voices together? I think for me, VCA, that's where we could really come in as a coalition and support this direct link, direct conversation between communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maimuna. And I apologize belatedly for throwing you under the bus like that, but thank you very much. I think it was definitely worth it to hear your reflections on that. We have a comment from William from WWF Indonesia. And it's quite an important one. And I'm wondering if, William, you do not want to unmute yourself and speak about this. I know your reflection here is that locally based climate solutions, aside from climate change, are heavily influenced by the culture and customs of an indigenous community. So the question is, can we distinguish purely locally based climate solutions from indigenous peoples and those that we intervene or provide knowledge and capacity for? This will give us an idea that whether the solutions from indigenous people are in accordance with their current needs and conditions. I hope I've captured that correctly, William, but if not, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. But I suppose to the panelists, maybe I'll throw that to you, Bob. Any thoughts on that? I think in some ways it ties to Ndinda's question about what qualifies as a locally led solution. When you talk about solutions that are for indigenous communities, yeah. So maybe some reflections from you on that.
I think I'll give an example, but I'll also tie it with part of some of the principles of locally led adaptation. Particularly when you're talking about first building a robust understanding of climate risks in the country. So in Kenya just months ago, all the county governments in the country, these are the devolved structures, had an opportunity. I mean, communities had an opportunity first to contribute to the development of what you call as participatory climate risk assessment. And so when communities are developing the participatory climate risk assessment, they're the ones who looked at the hazards at the ward level, the various hazards affecting them at the ward level, that's at the community level. Now, once they looked at the hazard at the ward level, they also came up with solutions or they proposed actions that they want the county governments they want the county governments to implement in the next 5 years between 2023 and 2027. So these are the communities are the ones who picked up these hazards. They indicated, for example, the areas where they said, our main challenge is droughts. The areas I said, as a community, our main challenge in this area is floods. Others say maybe it's land degradation. So they're the ones who came up with, they indicated the hazard that they're affecting them. Now, once county governments developed now the participatory climate risk assessment at the county level. The communities now also came from the same, they came up with solutions which were now packed into what we call as ward climate change action plans. So the word climate change action plans is what in most of the wards in the country, these are plans, actions that the communities have prioritized for the next 5 years. They're the ones who came up with them. Then they prioritize that they need the county government to implement in the next 5 years. And the good thing, particularly for Kenya, because we are now waiting in this financial year to see if this will be actualized, is that they're the ones who will actually be implementing these actions. Because in the devolved structures in the country, we have what you call as County Climate Change Fund. And also there are funding that are coming from other funding that are supposed to come from, other funding mechanisms. So communities at the ward levels are the ones who will be implementing these locally led actions at the ward level based on the action that they've prioritized for the next 5 years. And so already you can see that this ties in with some of the locally led adaptation principles, particularly first in terms of devolving decision-making to the lowest appropriate level. Then also when you're talking about, for example, even flexible programming and learning, because the expectation is that they're the ones who will now they'll be receiving funding through the county climate change planning committees, then through the ward climate change planning committees, they're the ones who will be implementing. And for most of the VCA partners in the country, not just the partners, but even the alliance members, this has been key because most of the partners supported most of the counties. Like, for example, we have Homa Bay County, Nakuru County, there's Mombasa County, Kisumu County, among others, where we had VCA alliance members and partners supporting these counties first to establish or even to develop the County Climate Change Fund, the County Climate Change Act, and even the funds and the regulations, which enabled now the counties to set up some of these structures. So I think it has been key for VCA partners and alliance members in terms of just ensuring that we're able to ensure that communities, at the end of the day, communities are the ones who will be able to implement and will be able to first come up with some of these interventions or the actions or the solutions. And then again, they'll be the ones who will be able to eventually implement these actions. And so for VCA, particularly when you look at now ensuring transparency and accountability, I think that is now another key important aspect now coming to the next financial year in the country, because now we want to see as a VCA partners to ensure that right now county government now will first allocate funding for communities to be able to implement the interventions that they proposed, but at the same time to ensure that communities are able also have the capacity to be able to track the implementation of some of these actions.
Thank you very much, Bob. Edda, I see your hand is up, so please feel free to unmute yourself and speak. But while you're doing that, I'd like to call on one of our colleagues from Indonesia as well. Doma, I'd like to hear your reflections from the Indonesian perspective, but also while I'm at it, just to say a big thank you to our colleagues from Indonesia. You're joining us very, very late. This time difference thing doesn't quite work for you. And in addition to that, it's a public holiday. So we are particularly privileged to have you joining us today. Thank you very much. So Domal, I'm looking for you to put your hand up and give us some reflections. But in the meantime, Edna, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Josh. My name is Edda Kipiego from Kenya, an organization called Jenga Future Initiative. We work with local communities to, especially the youth in their youth groups within the ward level. I think Bob has said so much about the wards. It's the smallest unit of counties here in Kenya. So we work with the youth groups by building their capacity, but first we engage them to understand their level of vulnerability, so that they are able to help their communities create the local solutions. And I just wanted to add on what Bob has said. I don't want to so much dig into what he has said, but just to add that community engagement is very important in terms of creating the local solutions, because they are the ones that understand where the climate change affects them most. So they have the solutions. So for us as the development partners, we are just coming in to enhance or maybe to strengthen the capacity that they already have. And maybe to add on that, the second point is that aligning these solutions with development programs or maybe development plans within the local county and also the national government. Aligning it will also improve on financing, because for example now, supposing they wanted something to enhance the roads so that when floods come, they are strong. So if they align that with the development plans that the county government already have, it will be easier for those solutions to be financed. Yeah, so that's my comment, and I'm very happy to join and learn more about the VCA. It's my first time to interact here. I've just been seeing it online, but I'm happy and I hope we'll continue to interact together. Thank you.
Rongoi sana, Eda. Thank you very much for your comments and yeah, very useful interventions as well. Dorman, are you there? I'm going to from Speak Indonesia. You have the floor.
So first of all, thank you for inviting me
Forum yang menarik ini ya.
to speak in this very interesting forum.
Speak Indonesia itu adalah bagian dari
So
kegiatan
Speak Indonesia is part of an activity
Voices for Just Climate Action
of
di kawasan urban
Voices
Jakarta.
for Just Climate Action in an urban areas in Jakarta.
Dalam implementasi kegiatan kami,
So Speak Indonesia in its activity implementation,
kami sangat mendorong peran perempuan di dalam penanganan
truly
masalah-masalah perkotaan.
encourage the role of women to help settle or tackle the urban issues.
Kota Jakarta, tempat kami beraktivitas sekarang,
So Jakarta
memiliki
is a
problem
city
sampah
where
yang
we
sangat luar
are
biasa,
residing, experiencing an extremely huge problems of waste,
di mana kota ini bisa memproduksi sampah 7.500 ton per day.
whereby Jakarta generated about 7,500 tons of waste every day.
Karena itu melibatkan perempuan dalam pengelolaan sampah di tingkat rumah tangga itu
That's
menjadi
why
sangat
we
penting dalam
find that
program yang kami
engaging women
kerjakan.
to do waste management at the household level become a key to bring success to the program that we're working on to address the waste issues.
Dan itu sekarang memberikan dampak yang sangat baik terhadap program pemerintah.
And the contribution of women somehow bring a positive impact to the realization or success to the program from the government.
Jadi pendekatan dan pelibatan perempuan yang kami lakukan itu sekarang sudah diapresiasi oleh pemerintah.
The government recognize the work that we do, particularly the role of the contribution of women's group in addressing the waste issue.
Karena pendekatan itu sangat membantu pemerintah itu sendiri menangani persoalan-persoalan sampah di Jakarta.
As the engagement of all these women help tackle the waste issue in Jakarta. Pak Dorma langsung aja ngomong Pak, saya nerjemahinnya simultan Pak.
Oh gitu, oke baik, terima kasih.
Jadi Pak Dorma langsung aja, nggak usah tunggu. Sorry, I was just telling Dorma to just continue speaking because I will be interpreting simultaneously for him.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. So jadi apa yang kami kerjakan sekarang itu, walaupun kami bekerja di area
even though we are
sebagian kecil dari Jakarta, tetapi peran-peran
small
perempuan
area
yang
in
kami
Jakarta,
libatkan itu merupakan bagian dari local shape yang sangat penting juga untuk mempertunjukkan bahwa perempuan itu bisa
part of the
dilibatkan.
locally led solution that shows that women can be
Kami
involved
membentuk
and can
organisasi yang
contribute a lot.
dengan Women Federation,
So we
di
have
mana oleh
also
kelompok-kelompok perempuan ini
established
mereka
a women federation
mengorganisasikan
group
dirinya
whereby the members
untuk
of the women
menjadi pihak-pihak
federation
yang terlibat dalam pengelolaan sampah. Kami juga mendorong Women Federation dari satu
taking
tempat
part
juga
in the
melakukan
waste management
peer-to-peer
issue, and the
knowledge
women
sharing
federation
kepada
members also
kelompok-kelompok Women Federation di tempat lain.
share knowledge to other Women Federation members.
Jadi kami
Of course,
melihat
in other
bahwa
areas. So we
di
find
setiap
that
kota dan di setiap tempat itu
every
lokalisep
cities
itu haruslah dibangun dengan
and
kondisi
every
dan
place should
karakter yang dimiliki oleh masing-masing
craft a
daerah tersebut.
solution that take into
Kami
account the
sangat percaya
characteristics
bahwa
of the respective
no one
areas.
size fit for all itu
And so we
haruslah
truly believe that
dikedepankan untuk
we
membuka
need to
ruang
cater
dialog antara
customized
perempuan,
solutions
kelompok perempuan, kelompok
to
masyarakat yang
open room for
termarginalkan,
dialogues
dan
for
kelompok
women's group,
pemerintah,
for the
kelompok
marginalized
swasta
group,
untuk
for the
duduk bersama,
governments
membangun
groups,
kesepahaman untuk
and all of
mengatasi
these different groups should
persoalan-persoalan di
sit together
perkotaan,
and should exchange
termasuk
knowledge
dengan
experiences
persoalan-persoalan di climate
to
change.
bring a success to the waste management issues that they are trying
Dan
to
yang terakhir
address.
ini saya mengundang
And
kepada
lastly,
teman-teman yang hadir
we
dalam
would like to
forum
invite
ini bila berkenan
all
untuk
of you
ke Jakarta,
attending
kami
this
sangat
forum
welcome dan
to
kami akan
visit
melihat
Jakarta
bagaimana peran-peran
and
perempuan yang kami
to
bantu
look
dalam
at
program
the
VCA ini
Women
menunjukkan
Federation
hasil yang baik.
members under the VCA
Dan tidak saja di Jakarta,
program
saya
that
pikir
have been
kegiatan ini juga ada
contributing
di Jogja, ada
substantially
di
to
Nusa
the
Tenggara Timur,
reduction or the
ada
management
juga
of
di
waste.
teman-teman
And
kami
apparently
di.
this women group are not only in Jakarta, but also in Nusa Tenggara and also in Yogyakarta.
Terima kasih.
Thank
Semoga
you for the
dapat dipahami.
opportunity.
I'm glad I called on you to speak, and your invitation to Jakarta is accepted. I'm tired of my colleagues traveling to Jakarta and visiting you all and me not coming, so I will be on the I will be out there very soon.
Tiffany come with us in last week, I think.
Exactly. Thank you very much. We are almost at the point where we need to be winding up, but what I'd like to do at this point, I do see one more hand up. Mukhtar, please go ahead.
I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. I'm Mukhtar from Drylands Learning and Capacity Building Initiative. We are a local NGO in Kenya, and we work with WWF Kenya. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. So mine was not a question, but just a comment. I loved the topics that we discussed, which include the local-based solutions, the social injustice, and the cost of locally led solutions. But I'm intrigued by the social injustice. The social injustice case was very well put by one of the speakers. She was from Brazil, Silvana. Yes, so Silvana, thank you very much. I really enjoyed what you talked about, and we at DLCI, that's the phrase that we use for us, the Drylands Learning and Capacity Building Initiative, we work with locals to register their land. So one of the main issues that she talks about was making land official, so that we could actually go in and improve ways of sustainability and climate change. So there's we are working on community land registration at the moment in the dryland areas in Kenya, and we find it's a bit difficult, but we have tried to improve the situation. And as Silvana said, it's not easy, but it really does help in improving the climate change. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. I really loved it. So thank you, Josh. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mukhtar. Silvana, your hand is up, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Mukhtar. Thank you very much. And yes, I agree. It all starts with regulating land and making society understand the role of these lands in our world. These lands need to be protected by local communities, and people need to understand the value of that. But I raised my hand because I wanted to thank Napitu from Indonesia for bringing to the table the conversation about involving women in this, engaging women, and the importance of women when building systemic climate solutions for the world. Of course, as a concept, when it comes to local solutions, a true locally led solution is a solution that has a direct impact on solving problems that women are impacted by, because these problems are felt by women, they are experienced by women, they are sensed by women, because it is women who are better able to truly translate a problem into a solution, and who are able to convey the problems that everyone has to face. Whenever a certain part of the world goes through a crisis, men leave. They go to work. This is very common in Brazil. So men migrate from the north or the northeast or the Midwest of Brazil to the south to work and send money home. But women are the ones who are left behind in their lands with their kids and the elderly. So women experience the problems throughout the cycle of a place. So without hearing women out and without taking their opinions into account, we won't have a truly locally led climate solution. It is also very important that they are in these lands. In Brazil, we've been talking a lot about the land and being in the land. Because when men flee and women stay, their land is still there because the women are still there and they are still protecting the land. But if we have problems and women have to flee as well, the whole family leaves, right? Kids go with them, the elderly go with them. So the land as a body becomes more vulnerable when women leave. So we need to think about locally led climate solutions based on women. Otherwise, we won't get serious about creating these solutions. So I'd like to really emphasize what Napitu said. I would love to visit you in Jakarta, Napitu, for sure. And I would like to also stress what Bob from Kenya and Edar, what they said about locally led climate solutions based on community. I agree with all of them. But please remember the role and importance of women in these solutions. Thank you.
Out of time, but it's very sad to have to close out a conversation like this that has been so rich in terms of what we've received. And I can't thank you enough, Silvana and Charlene, for the time and the inspiration and your sharing with us. We call it a knowledge drop, but for us, it feels more like a knowledge pickup because there was no knowledge we were dropping on anybody. We were receiving knowledge from everybody, and so richly. And thank you to everybody who asked the questions and made this session successful. My particular role in this is done, and I'm going to hand it over to Karen to do the official closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us here today. The participation has been great. And yeah, we want to also thank the panel, the panelists who were here today. Thank Bob, Silvana, and Shalane and Maimuna for doing the scene setting. We'd also like to thank Josh from SSN, who's been our moderator for today. Thank you so much to the interpreters. You've done an amazing job with doing the interpretation for our event. We'd also like to say thank you to our technical support team in the background, those from SSN, Lasejo, Charlotte, and Mel. Yes, I'm mentioning you. And yeah, as I said, for the Indonesian people as well, it's been so late. As Josh said, it's been so late there for you, but thank you all so much for joining us today. It's really, really appreciated. Yeah, so for following events and to get invitations to our events that will be happening in a couple of months, please subscribe to our Voices in Action newsletter and also follow us on socials to keep up to date with what's happening within VCA as well. So with that, thank you very much to everybody. Have a great evening, afternoon, and rest of your morning, and we hope to see you again.